they drove cows through the mine. And then the mine here went up, the cow went up, and then the way was clear. Okay, cars. Then what I'm speaking of is they did it with men, with soldiers. And soldiers in line, arm in arm, behind machine guns, and then the shoulders were blown up.
On July 3, 1941, just 11 days into the invasion, Germany's top military planner wrote something bold, almost unbelievable. This war would be finished in 2 weeks. 2 weeks! But what if that confidence was already built on a lie? What if the soldiers marching east were about to face something they were never prepared for? When Operation Barbarossa exploded into motion on June 22nd, German troops crossed into Soviet land with confidence, even excitement. They had been told a very clear story. The Red Army was weak, disorganized, and barely holding together. Officers drilled it into them during training. Pamphlets painted Soviet soldiers as inferior, poorly trained, and controlled by fear. Many believed it without question. Early letters sent home sounded almost casual, like victory was already locked in. Soldiers described endless columns of prisoners and defenses falling apart. But was that the full picture, or just what they wanted to see? That same belief reached the highest levels. Franz Halder, Germany's Army Chief of Staff, wrote in his diary that the campaign would likely wrap up in 2 weeks. Commanders echoed it, soldiers repeated it, and the idea spread fast. Everything seemed to be going exactly as planned, at least on the surface. But cracks began to show almost immediately. Why were some Soviet units still fighting after being surrounded? Why weren't they surrendering like expected? In the chaos of those early battles, something strange started happening. German troops pushed forward, thinking areas were secure, only to get hit from behind. Soviet soldiers, trapped in forests and swamps, kept fighting instead of giving up. They launched surprise attacks, cut supply lines, and refused to disappear. This wasn't the quick collapse everyone had been promised. So what was really going on behind enemy lines? Then came a shock that no one could ignore: the T-34 tank. When German anti-tank crews fired at it, their shells didn't just fail, they bounced off. Imagine facing a machine you can't even damage. The T-34 had thicker armor, better design, and stronger firepower than anything most German units had seen. Panic spread through reports. Some soldiers got so desperate they had to run up and place explosives by hand just to stop one. If the enemy was this strong, what else had they gotten wrong? By October 1941, the tone had changed. The confident letters faded, replaced by confusion and exhaustion. Soldiers no longer talked about easy victories. Instead, they described an enemy that wouldn't break, no matter how much punishment it took. The Red Army had taken massive losses, but it was still fighting, still resisting, still standing. And the deeper they pushed, the worse it seemed to get. If the war was supposed to be over in weeks, why was it only getting harder? Then November hit. German forces reached the outskirts of Moscow, but suddenly, everything stopped. Temperatures dropped to brutal levels, as low as -35°C. Equipment froze. Soldiers weren't prepared. The advance stalled completely. And now, with winter closing in and the enemy still fighting back, one question hung in the air. Had they walked straight into a war they could never win?
The cold didn't just slow them down, it broke them. Soldiers stuffed newspaper into their boots just to feel something. Engine oil froze solid overnight. Guns jammed at the worst possible moment. And those long supply lines, stretching hundreds of kilometers, they couldn't deliver what was needed. No winter gear, no fuel, no spare parts. The same troops who had marched forward with confidence in summer were now clawing into frozen ground, unequipped and exposed, waiting for relief that never came. But if the Germans were falling apart, how was the enemy still moving? Because the Soviet soldiers weren't fighting the same war. They moved through forests at night, dressed in white camouflage that made them nearly invisible against the snow. They attacked in brutal cold, hitting positions where German troops were too frozen to even react, then vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Reports from the front described something unsettling: an enemy who didn't stop, didn't slow down, and didn't play by the rules they expected. How do you fight someone who seems perfectly adapted to conditions that are destroying you? This wasn't just a tactical surprise. It shattered everything they had been told. German soldiers were taught that their enemy lacked initiative, that they only fought out of fear, but what they saw was the opposite. These soldiers moved with confidence, used the terrain, and adapted fast. It created a strange mental split. How could both things be true at once? The propaganda still echoed in their minds, but the battlefield told a completely different story. So which one do you believe when your life depends on it? Then it got worse, because the danger wasn't always in front of them. At night, Soviet troops slipped through gaps in the lines, cutting communication wires and sneaking behind German positions before dawn. Imagine waking up and not knowing if the ground behind you was already lost. Sleep became almost impossible. Every sound in the trees felt like a threat. The sense of control they once had? Gone. And with it, confidence started to crack. If they couldn't even trust their own lines, what was left? By spring 1942, the change was undeniable. Letters home no longer brushed off the enemy. Now they spoke with caution, frustration, even reluctant respect. The tone had shifted completely. These weren't the same soldiers who had marched in expecting an easy victory. They were facing something far more resilient than they had ever imagined. But as brutal as that winter had been, it was only the beginning, because soon they would enter a place where everything they knew about war would collapse entirely. In August 1942, German forces pushed into Stalingrad, expecting it to fall within a week. A week? Instead, they walked into 5 months of relentless, close-quarters combat that turned the city into a nightmare. Buildings were reduced to rubble, but that rubble became the battlefield. Soviet defenders turned destroyed homes into fortresses, moved through tunnels, hid in basements, and struck from places no one expected. Sewers, stairwells, factory ruins. How do you fight someone you can't even see?
Every inch of ground became a fight. Areas cleared in the morning were lost again by night. Progress wasn't measured in miles anymore. It was measured in meters. The fast-moving war they once knew was gone, replaced by a slow, grinding struggle where every step forward came at a cost. And inside that shattered city, one terrifying question started to grow. If this is what one city looks like, how much worse can it get? The war they thought they understood was gone. The structured battles they trained for had turned into something unpredictable, something patient, something almost impossible to pin down. Soviet forces didn't fight in straight lines. They blended into ruins, waited, watched, and struck when no one expected it. And then came the snipers. One name spread like a shadow through German ranks: Vasily Zaitsev. In just a few weeks, he racked up 225 confirmed kills. 225. And he wasn't the only one. Every step in daylight became a gamble. One wrong move, 1 second too long in the open, and it was over. Soldiers stopped moving during the day altogether. Fear wasn't just on the battlefield anymore. It was in their heads. How do you fight an enemy you can't even see? And just when they thought they had seen it all, something even more unexpected appeared in the skies. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment, later called the Night Witches, flew silently through the darkness. These pilots cut their engines mid-flight, gliding over German positions before dropping bombs in near silence. No warning, no clear target, just the sound of impact in the dark. Imagine lying there at night, knowing they could be above you, but you'd never hear them coming. These missions weren't rare. They flew over 23,000 sorties during the war. And they were part of a much larger reality German soldiers had never been prepared for. Around 800,000 women serving across Soviet forces as snipers, pilots, tank crews, medics. This wasn't the enemy they had been told to expect. So what else had they been wrong about? Then came the moment everything collapsed. February 2, 1943. Stalingrad was lost. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus surrendered what was left of the 6th Army. Around 91,000 German soldiers marched into captivity, the largest surrender they had ever seen. The city that was supposed to fall in a week had swallowed an entire army instead. And after the war, even German generals admitted it. This enemy had changed, adapted, improved faster than anyone expected. They learned from defeat, rebuilt, and came back stronger. The question is, why didn't anyone see it coming? The most honest answers didn't come from official reports or polished memoirs. They came from conversations that were never meant to be heard. German prisoners of war, held in places like Trent Park in Britain, spoke freely, completely unaware that hidden microphones were recording every word. Behind walls, in gardens, even near light fixtures, everything was captured. Around 150,000 pages of transcripts. Real thoughts, real opinions, no filters. So what did they say when no one was supposed to be listening?
Years later, historians uncovered those recordings, and what they found was shocking. In private, German soldiers spoke very differently about their enemy. They admitted Soviet resilience. They talked about skill, determination, and strength. Some even expressed respect, something they would never say publicly. The propaganda still lingered in their words, but underneath it, there was recognition. They knew the truth. The enemy they were told would collapse had done the exact opposite. So why keep believing the lie? Letters told the same story. Early messages from 1941 were filled with confidence, even arrogance. But by 1943, the tone had completely changed. Soldiers wrote about constant resistance, about enemies who came back again and again, about a front that never felt close to ending. Every forest, every building, every road had to be fought for. There was no easy victory anymore, only survival. And that shift didn't happen overnight. It built slowly through months of brutal reality that no amount of propaganda could explain away. Even top commanders couldn't deny it later. Men like Erich von Manstein and Heinz Guderian admitted that Soviet forces improved rapidly, faster than German planners had expected. Their tactics got sharper, their supply systems stronger, their industry replaced losses on a massive scale, and the individual soldier far more capable than anyone had predicted. Not one of them described an inferior enemy, not one. When you put all of it together, the letters, the recordings, the battlefield reports, a clear pattern emerges. In 1941, German soldiers marched in with absolute certainty about who they were fighting. But year after year, battle after battle, that certainty was torn apart. The reality didn't match the story. And by the end of the war, the survivors knew exactly what they had faced. 4 years, millions of lives, and one undeniable truth. Everything they were told at the beginning was wrong. So here's the real question. How different would history look if they had known that from the start?